What's up, y'all? You're watching Union Minded. I'm your host, Eric, and today we're going to discuss the Great Railroad Strike of 1877. Shout out Chuck. Thanks for putting this on my radar and piquing my curiosity so that I would look into this and bring it to you guys. Before we get into it, hit the like button, subscribe, ring the bell, drop a comment, share the video. You know the deal. Let's get it. All right, here we go. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, Great Railroad Strike of 1877. This is United States history. Great Railroad Strike of 1877. Series of violent rail strikes across the United States in 1877. That year, the country was in the fourth year of a prolonged economic depression after the Panic of 1873. The strikes were precipitated by wage cuts announced by the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. If you ever played Monopoly, that's B&O Railroad. Its second cut in 8 months. Railway work was already poorly paid and dangerous. Moreover, the railroad companies had taken advantage of the economic troubles to largely break the nascent trade unions that had been formed by the workers before and after the American Civil War. On July 16, 1877, workers at the B&O station at Martinsburg, West Virginia. West Virginia be some fighting folks out there when it comes to labor. They ain't playing around. Workers at the B&O station of Martinsburg, West Virginia responded to the announcement of 10% wage cuts by uncoupling the locomotives in the station, confining them in the roundhouse, and declaring that no trains would leave Martinsburg unless the cut was rescinded. West Virginia Governor Henry M. Matthews dispatched the militia when police were unable to break up the supportive crowd that had gathered. They had to bring in the militia because there was a supportive crowd right there with them in solidarity. Probably a lot of their family and friends came out to support them. When the militia then proved incapable of freeing the 600 or so trains stranded in Martinsburg, perhaps because many of the militiamen were themselves railroad workers sympathetic to the strike. Again, solidarity reigns in this example. But what happened after that? Matthews requested and received assistance from federal troops. After their arrival, trains were able to begin leaving Martinsburg on July 20th. The feds came in to break it up. And since they weren't from the area and they didn't have ties and their loyalty was to the owners, they came through on their job. But imagine if all workers realized that we were all on the same level and we all supported each other. The feds would have been called, they would have got there and they would have supported the strike. And then what you gonna do? Meanwhile, the strike had begun spreading along the main line of the B&O all the way to Chicago. And on July 19th, it grew to include Pittsburgh and the Pennsylvania Railroad. Another Monopoly piece. On July 19th, flagman Gus Harris unilaterally refused to work on a double header, a train hauled by 2 engines, thus requiring fewer workers. And the rest of the crew joined him. The resulting strike quickly grew and was joined by men from the nearby iron mills and factories. Again, solidarity spreading. This is something that's growing and something that we need to realize is our strength as workers. Elsewhere on July 20th, militiamen were sent to Cumberland, Maryland, where strikers had halted trains. At least 10 people in a crowd were killed by militiamen that were en route to Camden Depot, prompting the assignment of federal troops to Baltimore, Maryland. It's a shame when workers kill other workers for owners. It's a damn pity that happens. We really have to start to learn that we're on the same side of this fight. This is not a left and right struggle. This is a class struggle, and we're getting destroyed economically. And if we only realize we were on the same side, we could turn this fight around and win. But it's so hard to get everybody to realize that we are brothers and sisters in this fight, on this earth, in this land. It's a shame, really. Back in Pittsburgh, when local police and National Guard units were reluctant to act against their fellow townsmen, Pennsylvania Governor John F. Hartranft called in guardsmen from Philadelphia. On July 21st, after local forces had made only a token effort to clear the tracks of the growing mob, the troops from Philadelphia made a bayonet charge. A riot erupted with guns fired on both sides, and as many as 20 deaths resulted. As anger swelled among the workers, the guardsmen withdrew into a roundhouse while the crowd set fire to the Pennsylvania Railroad's engines, cars, and buildings. Gunfire was exchanged through the next night, with 20 more crowd members being killed, along with 5 guardsmen. A virtual general strike ensued in the city, with iron and steel workers, miners, and laborers joining the action. Although the entire National Guard of Pennsylvania was summoned, many units were delayed in arriving by the actions of strikers in other towns in the state. In Harrisburg, factories and stores were closed. In Lebanon, a National Guard company mutinied. And in Reading, a mob tore up tracks, derailed cars, and set fires. Nevertheless, by July 29th, a fresh contingent of National Guard supported by federal troops had brought calm to Pittsburgh and reopened railroad operations. By the end of July, the railroad strike had spread to a greater or lesser degree throughout the Northeast to cities such as Albany and Buffalo in New York, and to Midwestern cities such as Newark in Ohio and Chicago. The leaders of the major railway fraternal organizations, the Brotherhood of Locomotive Firemen, the Order of Railway Conductors, and the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers, however, appear to have been as frightened of the riots as the authorities were. Most disavowed the strikes. Many in the middle and upper classes, recalling the Paris Commune of some 6 years earlier, assumed that the aggressive strikes had been organized communist insurrections. They'll always do the Red Scare thing. Always. And you know what, though? We're talking 1877. A lot of these folks probably did believe that communism was a better way to go. Communists and socialists were actually at the forefront of strengthening labor and actually creating the labor movement that we so benefit from today. But yet they're maligned throughout history. It's really wild. In Chicago, the Marxist Workingmen's Union did provide more structure and organization to the demonstrations than elsewhere, but the actions they encouraged were quickly suppressed by the police and the National Guard. Only in St. Louis was there anything approaching an organized effort to take control, but by the end of July, the strikes had collapsed almost everywhere. The strikes dissipated first and foremost because the federal army did not break. Unlike the militias, those professional soldiers stayed together and followed orders. Professional soldiers. They're just workers that are paid to kill other workers. That's it. The strikes also collapsed because despite the fears of the industrialists and the government, they were not organized uprisings, but rather spontaneous outbursts. That's the thing. They paint it with a Red Scare tactic, but really this was just workers fed up, tired. Where are we today? You see what's going on with the railroad now and what the Biden administration did to them now. Where are we today? I'm not encouraging anything. I just am reading the tea leaves, and it looks like labor is going to be snapping back, but I could be wrong. Once the anger of the strikers and crowds had run its course, so too did the revolt. Then there's that. There had been no leaders with greater political vision to take command of the strikers. More than 100,000 workers participated in the Great Railroad Strike of 1877, at the height of which more than half of the freight of the country's tracks had come to a halt. By the time the strikes were over, about 1,000 people had gone to jail and some 100 had been killed. In the end, the strike accomplished very little. Some national politicians talked about labor reforms, but nothing came of it. Industrialists continued to cut wages and break unions. In a few years, the Great Railroad Strike of 1877 was all but forgotten. So, you know that when it comes to class struggle, the government is going to side with the sponsors of government, which is the owner class, even though it's the labor of the worker class which supports everything in government and everything in ownership. There is no ownership profit, no government funding without the hard work of the working class. Nothing proved it more than the pandemic, and nothing proved it more than the threat of a railway strike. They said that the workers would cost the economy $2 billion a day. Flip that on its head, because messaging is everything. The workers are worth $2 billion a day. What are we doing? Know your value. Know where your friends are. Know who your allies are. Talk to each other. Organize. And let's flip the script. The fight's not left and right, it's up and down. It's going to take solidarity to win always. Each one teach one. Get out there and reach one. And remember, there can be no union without you and I front and center. Peace.